All right, welcome to another episode of the Wild Strength Podcast. Today, my guest is Hunter Schurrer, and his walk-up song is It's a Long Way to the Top by AC/DC. We'll play a couple seconds of that before we get into things. It's such a classic one. Get together. I was trying to skip to like the chorus and I just kept getting all of the instrumentals, but that's totally fine. Anyways, like I said, I have Hunter Schurrer here. I'll let him introduce himself and then, we'll see where the conversation goes.
Yeah, we're very excited to be on here. It is always good to catch up. I know usually when we do so, it might be at a conference once a year. So it's a pleasure and honor to be on here. Guys, my name is Hunter Schurrer. I am currently Vice President of Training at the University of Health and Performance. Think of an organization that specializes in empowering veterans active duty to become health professionals, strength and conditioning coaches, integrative health coaches, soon to be a nutrition course will be standing up and well. So very much focusing on the military and veteran community to become strength coaches themselves. And then in addition to that, head coach and founder of the Performance Syndicate, usually remote stuff, but coaching for men and women when it comes to fitness and mental performance and all the things. Background is strength and conditioning. Spent over 10 years up at 1st Special Forces Group, and that's really where my love for the military and the tactical community formed. Fell in love with the homage. I know, had Nate Palin on a while ago, and he referenced humans are more important than hardware, and that really resonated with me and the community, but fell in love with the greater why when it came to training in so many different ways. And then prior to that was in collegiate athletics, University of Virginia, University of Wyoming. And so if you would have asked me at this point 20 years ago, which is crazy to say, what I'd be doing now and everything else, I would have had no clue. So it's background on all of that and just the love for training, the love for coaching and helping, people step into the best versions of themselves.
Yeah, I love that. And you're an athlete yourself. I mean, even before getting into coaching, I don't know that I've ever asked this. Is that what led you to coaching? I know a lot of strength coaches come from an athletic background. They work with coaches and maybe they're inspired by that coach. Is that kind of what led you down that route?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both in the regards of I love the process. And so kind of grew up a little bit as an athlete, but through discus and hammer in college, had success with that. But I love the weight room. I love the training and being like, wow, if I pour X into this is what, I get on the backside of it. And so really fell in love with the journey, fell in love with the process of it. And then had the opportunity, went to the University of Virginia where I did my master's because I was small school, Western South Dakota. I didn't have any strength and conditioning coaches. I didn't know it was a thing. I mean, not to date myself, this is really before YouTube. And it's like, okay, so I had Arnold's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, like I think so many people did. Like you'd be in the gym. I had no clue what I was doing. And when I got to UVA, worked under some amazing coaches. Evan Marcus, who's now the head guy with the Arizona Cardinals, and then Ed Nordenchild, who is still head Olympic coach at the University of Virginia, very much like laid the foundation and created the love that I have for strength and conditioning and coaching and all that it was. So it was very much the process and all that, wrapped up into training itself.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because a lot of athletes are more like outcome oriented, especially in an individual sport, right? Like you threw and those athletes tend to, and in my experience, maybe you've experienced something similar when I worked in more of the like private sector setting, the individual athletes who come in there, like they almost don't even like training and they just feel forced to do it. And so buying into the process and obviously as coaches, that's really what we try to teach. But I think starting early on, being invested in the process is huge and probably even says a lot about who you are.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that came with it was there was so much organic growth for myself in regards to it. It was a lot of playing, a lot of figuring things out. I didn't have anybody like forcing me to do it, but I saw what happened when I got stronger, when I put the time in, that it then translated to those results. And so it turned really into kind of like that laboratory, so to speak, like even going back and looking at like the last workout I would have, like the weed of a meet, I would do like, okay, I want to be fast, so I need to do things that are fast. And when I look back on it, it was kind of a form of like what you might reference as like nervous system priming. like just some jumping,
Mm-hmm.
or even if it was like stuff that you wouldn't do, like I'm going to move this chest press machine really fast. But like point being, like it was me playing, and look back on that was,
Yeah.
it was cool to see the results on that. So to share that with others is cool.
And I think even going into probably your saw success early on as a coach,
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine, because of that ability to just play, right? Like, and I can speak for myself. I think I early on, and a lot of coaches are this way. I was more of like a textbook coach, right? Like I know what the NSCA textbook says. I know what I learned in school, and so this is how we're going to do things. And then you start to
Yep.
see that like human bodies are different and different things happen, and you're like, oh my god, I learned everything I thought I learned everything, and now I'm seeing these responses are different than maybe what was talked about. So I'd even imagine, yeah, if you had that time to just kind of play yourself, that probably helped early on too.
Yeah, and we were very much encouraged from the coaches that I had at Virginia, because
Yeah.
again, you get to a strength staff, and at that time, there was really like 4 or 5 coaches there, and so watching each one of them take things that were theoretically textbook and how they applied them, then how they added in
Mm-hmm.
their own individual, them, and their authentic selves. Some might be
Mm-hmm.
very by the book. Other people, there was a guy who worked with like men's soccer and wrestling, like he would build to like almost daily maxes on a random basis, and then he'd drop back down and do percentages off of that. And so at the time, I didn't even recognize it because I'd only been kind of in the game for a year. But to look back and now understand more of that process, but always was trying to learn, always trying to play. But yeah, I mean, going back to the NCAA textbook, I mean, I remember trying to prep for the CSCS, and I'm like, if I don't pass this test, I can't coach, so I need to regurgitate and memorize and do all those things. And there's obviously so many
Yeah.
amazing things in there to coach by the book. But yeah, adding in those things that, like, even if you're trying to figure out this works, I don't know why it works, but let's try it again. Let's see, and all those different pieces. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to, and we always, as coaches, always say this now is like, obviously the textbook is great and you learn a lot from it, but there are people who can go and make 100% on that test, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're a great coach. And we can kind of dive
Yeah.
into the, like you're working with military and the humans are more important than hardware concept of that. Like at the end of the day, we're working with humans. And if you can't communicate with these humans, which I feel like is the biggest part of being a coach and building relationships, then you're not really a great coach at the end of the day, no matter how much you know.
Yeah, and it's the first experience I had, again, going back to Virginia, is we had a week of testing with the football team, and we had a lineman at the time who didn't do great, and kind of the strength staff sitting around trying to figure out problem solve and all of that. And then I was like, well, hey, I heard the guys talking, and he just broke up with his girlfriend, and they're like, oh, well, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you, like? I'm like, in my head, it didn't click at the time. But then,
Mm-hmm.
so like looking back at some of those like milestones, I'm like, okay, that is that important when it comes to it. So to your point, yeah, like it has to be a human first mentality. And that was something that I really enjoyed with as far as the military, because you got guys
Yeah.
that, like, I'm not going to jump a guy for coming in late to a training session at group when it's like, oh, he's been gone for 9 months. He hasn't seen his kids. So he's like, yeah, I'm going to be late because I get to take my kids to school today. Or yeah, I get to
Mm-hmm.
spend that 15 minutes, with my wife. I might miss some of the warm up, or I might miss some of the conditioning. But what is more important? So at least understanding that doesn't mean that you don't want them to
Yeah.
help understand the other pieces. But yeah, if all you're doing is coaching by the book, you're going to miss out on the human aspect. And to me, that's a difference maker. And so anytime, whether it's at UHP or the people that I work with, getting people to understand that coaching is a human endeavor,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to connect to their why. Because if you don't understand their why, you're really going to struggle into
Yeah.
understanding what drives them, what are motivating factors for them. How do you then get more out of them? Because I've seen amazing coaches to where you look and theoretically their program was meh. And that's not a knock on the coaches, but then you see how they coach and you see how they have the trust with the athletes and the athletes in them, and how the people work and show up. And I'll always take a coach that trusts and empowers athletes over, a beautiful program. Not that that's not important, because you can have
For
both.
sure.
But point
Mm-hmm.
being, yeah, people are so important first.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And even I've kind of learned over the years is, and I think more, yes, in the athletic population, but I've kind of more specifically learned this working with military and law enforcement is like sometimes even just getting them to show, and maybe they don't even work out that day, right? Like maybe they showed up to the facility and like that was enough for them. And they're like, I showed up to the facility. But then as a coach, like you just talked to them. Maybe you had a 30-minute conversation with them. Maybe you had a whole hour long conversation with them and they didn't even touch a weight. They didn't warm up. They didn't hit the bike. They didn't do anything. But like they bought into you as a person because they're like, this person cares about me. And then that's what gets them to keep coming. And maybe they need those conversations. Like the number of times I've had a conversation with someone and they were like, phew, like I needed to get that off my chest. And I just like haven't had the time or the space to get that off of my chest. Like that means more to me than like seeing someone throw around a bunch of weight. Like I'm glad that space was here for you because you probably needed it more than anything else.
Yeah, very much so. I think especially within athletes or the military, law enforcement, whatever it is, you have a lot of people that are very task oriented, very driven, very high, very much in the high performers. And you see it even within the business world as well. And so getting them to almost ask them, how are you doing? But no, really, how are you doing? What's going on with you? How are you showing up? What are your, an expression that I love is what are your ways of being in regards to, yes, you got this. And it's something I am so guilty of, in which my fiance will ask me, how was your day? And I'll list off tasks. I'm like, I did this and this and this. And she's like,
Yeah.
I asked
That's
how
not
your
what I
day
asked.
was, not what did you do today? And I think so many people, that's our mindset. It was a great day because I got all these things done. And so when you work with these people in the communities like that, it's like, no, how are you doing? How, like, what are you feeling? What's going on? And they just, to give them that space that you reference, to let them, dump that backpack, unload just a little bit, take a breath, give them the permission and that trust for them to be able to take that breath and realize, okay, this was, how do you celebrate that as a massive win that allows you to do things down the line?
Yeah. Did you ever struggle with guys who just wouldn't ever, like you could kind of tell even by the way they carry themselves, the way they walk in the door, that like something's probably off, or maybe they're stressed or whatever, but like who just would never open up? Because I had a good mix of those as well.
Yeah. And and the fun part as a coach is it's problem solving. And that is really how I look at coaching. It is 100% problem solving for the individuals that you get to look at, whether that is programming and anything that you're doing is trying to fix that problem, whether it's trying to get through to that individual. Why are they not connecting?
For
I mean,
sure.
we had a guy at group that was like, yeah, you reminded me of a coach I had in high school and I hated that guy. So because of that, I hated you. And it's like, so right away, just automatically puts that on me and then we start having these conversations. So those walls come down. And it depends on the environment. I mean, I was an outsider coming into group. And so the best way for me to prove was just try to be there, not tell them what to do, not do anything other than I'm just going to spend time with you and try to learn. And once they saw that I didn't have an agenda other than trying to learn, you saw walls come down. Or you'd have guys that were like, I need to see, or I'm going to test you by asking question after question after question to see if you actually know what you're doing. And so there's so many ways, but it starts with trust. And I think that is such an important word. I think there's so many coaches out there that use the expression buy-in, and I can't stand it. Because to me, it feels very transactional, or the fact that you as an athlete should buy into what I'm doing, buy into our program. Well, trust is a two-way street. And when you look at some amazing coaches out there, Don Staley at the University of South Carolina is a very trust-driven coach. I'm going to trust you to be you, to do your job. Now, if you break that trust, it's a whole separate thing. But point being, yeah, it's trust and allowing them, to do their thing. But yeah, to your point, you see it. Once you know those athletes, you can tell something's off, a little quiet this morning. It's, in helping people understand coaches. Like when I'm asking you, how'd you sleep? How did you do in the morning? What's going on with you? It is me trying to collect all these data points to understand who you are as a person. Yes, I care about how you slept. Yes, I care about you as a person, but it's then allowing me to make the best decisions for you as your coach. And you can always tell. Coaches, in the strength and conditioning world know it better than anybody. They have more touch points usually, whether it's in the military space or the athletic space, than most other coaches. So it's, yeah, you can usually tell when people are off, and that should be usually one of your primary jobs is to, what's going on with your people first.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge. And I guess that kind of like, I think one thing I've considered possibly doing, and I know you mentioned the performance syndicate and you do programming and stuff like that. I think my biggest thing and why I haven't dove into that yet is because I feel like I'm missing that human approach to it. And not that obviously we're still working with humans, but like how is that something that you navigate whenever you're kind of working with people who are remote? Maybe they're not near you, they don't live anywhere near you. How do you kind of navigate that aspect of coaching in that scenario?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because it can be so easy when we look at working with people remotely, remote clients or people that we don't see on a daily basis. You'd even see that sometimes in the military as far as programming for people that are downrange. Like, well, I can't program for this person. I don't see them on a regular basis. So
Right.
one, communication, but you get, to set that tone, but it goes into so much helping the athletes, helping your clients, whoever it is, as well as then owning it as a coach, that coaching is so much more than the program. And I think,
Right.
not to go off on like a business or a marketing thing, but people say like, yeah, I'll give you this program. I can get a program for $19, for $10, for $20 for free. When you look at what coaching really is, are we changing behaviors? Are we empowering people? Are you there from a guidance, a support standpoint, accountability? And am I then building in that coaching specifically tailored to you to help you get to where you want to go?
Right.
Understand their why. Hey, I noticed that you haven't trained the last couple of days. Well, why haven't they trained? Oh, that's right. It's his anniversary and they're doing this. Awesome. They're going to the hotel. Like there's so many things to do, but it's understanding that working with people remotely is so much more than just the program. And you have to believe that and
Right.
know that as a coach, because if all you're doing is
Right.
offering a program, you're right. It's going to be really hard. There's not going to be the human connection. But if you're like, man, this person needs my help, here's how I can help them, whether I'm there or not, allows you to kind of flip that switch. And then you start viewing things, I think, a little bit differently. And then the people that you work with are like, yeah, because I don't want my clients there to feel like I have to hold their hand. I am hoping
Right.
that the information and the coaching and everything else that they can do, but still knowing that I'm going to hold accountable. I'm going to make sure that they know exactly what's going on. We'll communicate accordingly, adjust this and that. But it is so much more than just the one piece that is programming.
Yeah, I would agree. And even I think too, when it comes to that, I always say, and you mentioned this as well, you don't want to give people a program of things that they like to do. Obviously, we can run a needs analysis. We can see maybe what the needs are, if it's something for their job or their sport or whatever. And we want to incorporate those things to a degree. But more importantly, like, what do you like to do? Because that's how you're going to stick to a program. That's how you maintain consistency. Because if I just give you a program that's full of things that you need, or even things like, I think when people go and find that like $20 a month basic online program that's from their favorite like Instagram trainer or whatever, it might look like a cool program. But then, like you said, we or you can offer that human approach to communicating and then even just providing that accountability. Because I think from my experience, what I see is most people lack that accountability. And I actually had a conversation with someone the other day, and she was saying like some people, especially if it comes to more like general health and wellness goals, maybe such as weight loss or something like that, some people even fear that success, right? They fear that if I start to lose the weight or if I start to get stronger and people see that, then now I have to maintain that.
Yep.
So if you have someone who's coaching you, who's working with you, who can support you and help with that accountability, I think that's such a huge piece that so many people are lacking.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, like even if they're like, I want to lose the weight, I want to get to this, change is scary. It doesn't matter who you are. The unknown,
Yeah.
like the devil you know is always better than the devil you don't, so to speak. And because of that, that change in our egos and that voice in our head is so smart. We start buying into our own stories like, well, if I lose the weight, then this is going to happen. And then we start living in the future that's never going to come. And we create all these stories and we build it up. And it is so scary. Like, well, that's not the life I want, or I don't want to do that. But yeah, to your point, like the accountability piece, it is not just, did you do X, but helping them understand and like, hey, the reason why we're doing this is because it's important to you. You've got kids now, and you talked about you want to be the grandpa that's down on the floor playing with them while still then going for, the hike with your wife or your husband, whoever that may be, in 40 years. You don't if you're average right now, we have to get you ahead of the curve. Because if you want to look at what does the average 80-year-old look like? Is that what you want? No, then we can't wait until then. We have to be proactive and go from there. But yeah, the accountability piece, and it goes to the why. I'll always circle back to why and all that it is when it comes to that mindset, because it's understanding. Then it allows you to really dig deep. And when you look at the mindset work, it's Viktor Frankl, psychologist through the Holocaust and all that it was, Man's Search for Meaning. If people haven't read the book, but he who has a why can bear with almost any how. In other
Mm-hmm.
words, if you've got a purpose, if you have a why, it's going to allow you to tap into, do you really want it? And why am I doing this in the first place? But yeah, to your point in regards to, giving people what they want versus what they need. First, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sure you, as any other trainer or coach, anybody out there, you go to a party and people are like, how do I lose weight? Well, let's start with, what do you like doing? What's like the
Yeah.
smallest win we can do? Yes, of
Mm-hmm.
course, we need to increase your VO2 max. We need to increase your grip strength. We need to increase your ability to pick things up. What do you do right now? So let's not worry about like increasing your VO2 max. Let's just see if you can actually walk once a week, twice a week.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're up to 4 days a week. Well, I want to get better. I'm like, awesome. And so helping them understand, here's where you are, where do you want to go, and how do we get there together?
Yeah, no, you make a really good point too, and I think that's huge, especially if you're working with someone you've never worked before, and maybe even in a remote capacity. Like, let's see what you can commit to, right? So, if you like to get out and go for a walk, it's nice where you live. Let's just touch base a couple times a week, and let me know how many times a week you get out for that walk. Like, is that something that you're actually committing to? And I think that might even be a struggle for some folks, because I know in today's world, we want results right away. We want to lose the weight right away. We want to get stronger right away. We want to build muscle right away. And so I know, and you might have experienced this, a lot of people come asking, like, what's the quickest way I can do this? I had someone ask me a question yesterday, and it was in regards to like just training for rucking and packing out and stuff like that. And he was like, my hip flexors get really sore every time I throw on a heavy pack. And I'm like, well, I know you want to throw on a heavy pack right away, but we have to work up to that, and we have to adapt to that. And while you want to be able to pack out 70, 80 pounds tomorrow, that's not realistic. We have to work up to that. So maybe let's a couple times a week throw on something a little bit lighter. And then like, as you start to feel less sore, then we can bump it up.
Yeah.
But if you're just constantly adding weight, that's not going to do you any good at all.
Yeah, especially, when you look at those progressions like that, it's like, okay, where's the end goal? Where are we at right now? But also,
Mm-hmm.
like, a big fan of minimal dose. What is the least I can do to
Yes. Yeah.
progress? Because 99% of us are all quote unquote recreational athletes. We do
Yep.
not then have the time to, but so many of us have a tendency to want to train like a professional athlete. In other words, I want to pour in the gym and I want to do that because I want to look like that. Awesome. But that athlete doesn't have to then go pick up the kids. You've got a new baby at home. You're sleeping 4 hours a night. Oh, you do like to go hikes with the family. You do like to do all these other things. And understand that, like, you only have so much. And not to put like a limited mindset or limits on
Yeah,
anything,
for
but
sure.
point being, you need to understand, like, do you still want to do the other things in life? Okay, cool. What can we sustain? So for
Mm-hmm.
me, like, it's always a litmus test. Like, and I'm sure the people I work with are tired of it. I'm like, scale of 1 to 10. Like, if it's not a 9 or a
Yeah.
10, then I'm not going to probably introduce it into their program. How many days a week can you train? Well, if I can train like 5 days a week is probably a 7, 4 is a 9. Okay, cool. We're going to write 5. We're going to, program for 5. We're going to count on 4, and we're going to go from there, because like, we
Yeah.
got to stack wins. We got to build that consistency, and we got to start with the sustainability piece. But yeah, it's going back to the rucking, man. I fought fire for the Forest Service when I was in college. And so like, we'd have to start prepping, and it allowed me to step in the military space. And like, this is a world I can actually live in, because having a pack and then having like two 45-pound water bladders on and a saw and, and a tool or whatever it was. But yeah, you need to start light and just gradually go from there, from what are you doing now to what's the easiest step you can do that doesn't create soreness, that allows you to do something in the day after.
Yeah, I think, and kind of what we're, for anyone who's listening, we're kind of referencing longevity without actually saying longevity. And thankfully, more and more that's becoming popular, and more people are like, yeah, I want to be able to train to, whether it's in the military, they want to be able to still be fit when they get out, and they still want to be able to be fit for the 20 years that they're in. Or if it's completely outside of that, an athlete or whatever, like, I just want to be able, like you said, simply to pick up grandkids at 80 years old, when there's maybe a lot of 80-year-olds who can't pick up
Yeah.
their grandkids. And I think that longevity piece is, like I said, thankfully becoming more and more important. But then, yeah, we have to dial it back now. We can't always, and maybe you experience this too, working with First Group. You have those guys who come in who are just like heavy hitters, right? Like they come in, they go hard in their training for work, they go hard in the gym all the time, and it's like admirable to see sometimes what the human body can go through and the limits that we can push
Yeah.
ourselves to. But also having to educate on this side of like, hey, maybe we should dial, like you said, that minimal effective dose. And I kind of had this conversation with someone the other day. As our training age gets older, we're less likely to lose strength. We're less likely to lose our cardio or like our aerobic capacity. So if we're just kind of sprinkling those a little bit into whatever we're doing, like we're going to be better at maintaining those. So what is the least amount I can do to still be strong, to still be fast, to still maintain that VO2 max? And more, like I said, that's becoming popular, but I still think that there's still those few, and I won't mention any like famous names, but there's still those few famous people who are like heavy hitters and saying that you have to go hard all the time. And people love that stuff too.
Yeah, they do. I mean, it's what sells, and I'm not going to ask who's going to carry the boats right now, but point being, like it is. And so, then as a coach, how do you allow people to touch it, to play with it, to like, because that military mindset, the law enforcement mindset, you've got so many people that they're taught that if I've got some in the tank, I didn't give it all, give my all. Mm-hmm. And so that was one of the biggest things from an educational piece, at group that we had to help guys understand. That's awesome. You empty the tank, you are vomiting, laying on the floor Monday. And then I don't see you until Thursday because you are so sore and so beat up and you can't perform to the level that you want to until another 4 days later. How is that going to set you up for success? Because you've been miserable the last couple days. So how do we get you to understand that training is great for today? How do we then make sure you can train tomorrow and the day after that? And then setting up, if from the coaching standpoint, what are parameters that allow people to compete, to empty the tank in certain ways that still fit in with the way that they can recover and come back from. But yeah, it's longevity. The more, and I'm probably biased because we all get older by each year. But point being, like you start to realize how important that is. Mm-hmm. From the career of an athlete, from lifespan to all of the different things. I've yet to meet anybody other than, people that are literally training for the Olympics in that short term that are like, no, right. I care about tomorrow. I care about what I'm going to be like when I get out, when I retire, when I go home. And so that always needs to be in the back of the mind. Yes, what can you do to improve people? But also then an ego check from the strength coach or conditioning coach's side is understanding that you're probably not going to win the game. You might not be the difference maker, but you can set people up and empty that tank and fry them out even more. So.
Yeah, I think you bring up and the recovery piece too. Not only does doing the kind of minimal effective dose, we'll call it, the minimal amount that we can maintain, does that help with our recovery? But yeah, you mentioned the guy who comes in on Monday, he kind of kicks his stuff in and he's toasted. And then Thursday he rolls back in and he's been sore all this time. And maybe Thursday he's still sore. But he maybe tried like foam rolling and supplements and all of these other things to try and recover from that hard workout. When I always like to keep it simple, stupid, or keep it stupid, simple, however you want to put it. Like simple always works. And we try so hard to stray so far from what's simple. Because like I said, society makes it popular and it looks cool and it's fun sometimes. Like I also like doing a workout every now and then where I am like on the ground and I can't breathe afterwards. Like it's fun to test your limits, but to go in and do that day in and day out, and for that to be your daily training, like the body has no time to recover from that. And even then can take, a whole week, assuming you're sleeping right, assuming your nutrition is on par, assuming all these other things are lining up, versus like, oh, coach, how can I recover? Well, let's even first look at what you're doing in your training. Like, let's not even think about all of these other outside things. What does your training look like? And how can we maybe dial that back or adjust it so that you are able to recover from what you're doing?
Yeah, recovery is obviously the key to everything. And one, making sure that you train hard enough to actually earn the recovery, so to speak, and understanding, to your point, that training coincides with everything that we do. It's something that I really try to preach to people that are working with any first responders, law enforcement, or that is, do not break them off for the point of you don't know if they're going out on a call, you don't know what their situations are. Like, they need to make sure that they always have some in the tank. And so how can you push them to that point where they improve but not smash? And then I think all of us anymore, with especially in the age of information, if that's even a thing, I feel even old or dated saying that, but it's like we're fascinated with, man, call it recovery porn, so to speak. I know sleep is
Yeah.
important for me, but because I know about it, that means that I can worry about the next thing. I don't sleep, but I get up
Mhm.
every morning super early and I get in the cold plunge. So that's better for me. When it might have been better for you to sleep an extra 30 minutes. And so just helping people understand that just because they don't, just because they know about these recovery modalities, to make sure that
Yeah.
they're not stepping over, $100 bills for the next shiny tool. You see the people that roll in on 4 hours of sleep, and I'm going to hit my cold plunge, and I got my pre-workout, and I got my massage gun, and I'm doing that, and I'm prepping and doing all the things. Why am I not recovering? You're over caffeinating to wake up in the morning. You're drinking to fall asleep. Sleep's not important to you. And then you're breaking yourself off in the gym. Like, what are we trying to do here? I know that's a little bit of a tangent on stuff, but yeah,
No, I think
it's
that's perfect and correct. And yeah, I think everyone sees the big shiny thing, like you said, the cold plunge. And I get asked that so much, right? Like, Coach, what's the like? Do you know the benefits of the cold plunge? I heard Huberman talk about it on his podcast, and I'm like, well, first, do you like doing the cold plunge? Is that something that you like to do? If you like to do it, by all means, I don't want to take it away from you. If you're feeling something, some sort of benefit, whether it's a mental or a physical benefit, by all means do
yep.
it. But what else are you doing? Are you sleeping? Is your nutrition right? Because if you're using that cold plunge specifically for recovery, and you're missing the point on all of these other things, then yeah, you're kind of missing the mark here. But if you just simply like to do it and you like, or maybe it's a mental challenge for you and you like to do that, just that get the dip in every morning and you did something quote unquote hard, which is cool too. I think those are good things to do. But if you're using it specifically for recovery and you're missing the mark on all these other things, I'm going to tell you like, maybe you shouldn't do it. Like maybe you're using it for the wrong purpose, right? And everything goes back to educating and just having the right conversation with whoever's asking so they have a better understanding of that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're spot on. It's why are you doing it? Is it because it's a challenge, because it wakes you up? Great. But understand, like, before you spend $4,000, $5,000 on the new high-tech cold plunge, which is awesome to have at home, are you willing to just like spin your, shower nozzle to cold? Because now are you going to add in a whole other routine? Because like I
Yeah.
have this fear that in the next 2 years, we're going to start seeing cold plunges like how treadmills used to be at houses. It's just going to become like this other storage table, or you're going to be sitting in the back of the garage because that
Yeah.
fad has passed compared to, people draping their clothes on the treadmill. And yeah, to your point, it's go back to the why. Why are you doing it? Do you want to have fun with it? Is it like one more piece that, like, I get it, like drinking pre-workout is fun, and if it's your ritual that gets you into training and it helps you mentally prepare, even if it's a placebo, awesome. But like if we look at like that hierarchy of recovery and we're looking at sleep, then we look at nutrition, then we look at hydration, and we look at cold plunges are at the top. And no matter, you could do 12 a day and it's not going to make up for 1 hour of sleep. And so just getting people to understand that, but that doesn't sell.
Yep. The simple doesn't sell, the good things don't sell, the science doesn't sell. It's like the cool, flashy, shiny
Yeah.
things. I do kind of want to, so you would kind of an open, like if you don't want to touch on it, you don't have to, but you had kind of
Yep.
had I'll say like journey yourself for lack of a better word, where and from my understanding, it was just kind of pushing yourself to your limits for quite a while. And you kind of had ended up in the hospital. And then that was a big like turning point for you from what I know, as far as taking better care of yourself as you started to get older, taking better care of yourself for your loved ones. If you want to talk a little bit about that, just kind of for anyone who doesn't know you, I think that would be super cool.
Yeah, I kind of grew up like I feel like I'm in this beautiful world of like the old school people and the new school people and all of that. But it was very much ingrained in me, like as a coach, like you're not late to sessions, you don't miss sessions, you don't miss training, you don't miss coaching, you don't do any things. And so unless you're, for lack of a better expression, like on your deathbed, like you're coaching and you're teaching, you're doing that because when you develop that mindset, and that's what's been ingrained in you, right, wrong, or indifferent, like you want to make sure that I cannot let these people down. It is my job, it is my gift. I need to share and I need to help them and I want to do that. And there's also going to be a selfish aspect to that. Let's not lie. As far
For
as it
sure.
makes us feel good because they're like, man, I want to help them, and they get back and forth. Anyways, so yeah, it's almost 2 years ago at this point. Started just noticing what I thought was like a rib out. And so being a competitive athlete and coaching and all the things, like you get sore, it's like, okay, I've gone on 4 hours of sleep for months and years on end, and I've trained and I've gone through this. So I'm just probably a little beat up, whatever it was. And in the wearable that I was wearing at a time, it's like it started to tell me things, and I just wrote it off. So good thing I was wearing it because I didn't listen to a darn thing. But like all of a sudden, my breathing, my respiratory rate increased. It was like 40% higher when I was
Oh,
sleeping
wow.
at night. My HRV like
Yeah.
fell off the map, and I'm like, what is going on? I'm like, just because I've got rib out. And it turned out I had a really, really bad case of pneumonia. And they're like, you should have been in here weeks ago. And when they were about to release me from the hospital, like, let's do one more chest x-ray. And what I was actually feeling was my right lung had so much fluid around it, it was being crushed. And so it had gotten to a point to where I couldn't sit, I couldn't move or anything. And it was just brutally painful. And so it ended up with a chest tube going in through my back. And they said like the normal amount is 50 milliliters to have in that pleural sac around the lung. And they pulled out 3,500 over the course of the next week. And so to
Wow.
have 70 times the healthy limit. And so literally was in a hospital, hooked up to suction on the wall. And it wasn't life threatening or anything like that, but it was not fun. And it was a really good lesson that this could have been easily preventable had I come in weeks ago. And so really the lesson that came out of that was I wasn't listening to the signs. I thought I would be fine. And not that age, caught up to me by anything, but living a certain way of,
Yeah.
sleeps. Like, trust me, I know, like, one of my biggest downfalls is the fact that, like, in my head, just because I know the rules, I think I can break them at times. It's like, well, those rules apply to the normies out there. Like, that doesn't apply to me. I'm better than that. I want to be better. Therefore, I can't follow the same rules. And then it's like, when you
Right.
don't follow the rules, you learn the lesson. You're like, well, I should have seen that coming. But it was a bad deal. And so, thankfully, had some people take care of me and all that, but it was not good. And it could have been really, really bad. But, fortunately, got some really good lessons out of it. And it's now something in the back of my head. But between that, I had a bad foot injury when I was a young strength coach, and lessons like that, in which like crawling across my floor, like to get a glass of water. Well, now I can't, previously I might jump one of my college basketball players. Like, why were you late to the training room? Do you not care? Do you not want to get your knee better? You talk about wanting to go to the league. Meanwhile, like once I learned, like it's a 19-year-old kid, and now it takes them longer to shower. It takes them longer to do that. And it's one thing to know it, but it's like when it happened to me, I was like, I got to start putting people in my head. I was a human first coach, but that just elevated it up. So I've had kind of some really good milestones if I actually choose to listen in regards to like, you have to take care of people. You have to take care of yourself. And because otherwise, if you don't model that, it's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. You literally cannot pour from an empty cup. And so
Yep.
making sure that if you want to show up as the best version of yourself, that other people, that your athletes, your clients deserve, you have to take care of yourselves. And it's obviously the world that we know, but collegiate strength and conditioning coaches, tactical strength and conditioning coaches, personal trainers, people in this field, this health and wellness and fitness field, will burn their bodies to the ground to try to make a living, put others first, whatever it may be. We've got this servant leader mentality, which is beautiful, but we have to figure out a way to make sure that we take care of ourselves, or we're going to be really short-lived and we're going to be just another coach that got out and is now doing real estate or selling insurance. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but not if the only thing is wrong with that is if that's not what you really want to do. So you got to take care of yourself.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. One, thank you for sharing. Two, I think you bring up a really good point, and I even like find myself saying this sometimes too, as like, do as I say, not as I do, right? Like, we're sitting here telling people we're preaching recovery, we're preaching like don't go too
Yeah.
hard, we're preaching this, we're preaching that, but then here I am doing exactly what I'm telling people not to do, because yeah, I don't know if it is, it's never verbally said, but every coach I've ever met, at least when they first started, and even some of them 10, 20 years into it, are still this way. Like you said, we put others before ourselves, and I think it is like very commendable, and like it makes us, I don't want to, it doesn't make us better than anybody else, right? Because we like to do
No.
that. But I think because, and especially in this tactical space, like we have such a tight knit community because we are the type of people, whether it's our athletes or our friends or fellow coaches, we put everybody else first. And we pour and pour and pour into other people. And we love to see other people better themselves. We love to see other people get bigger, faster, stronger, like all of these things. But to your point, we don't do that to ourselves very often until I think it takes a moment like that, whether it's something as bad as being in the hospital, or you break something, or maybe it's something like in your home life that you recognize is falling apart. It oftentimes, unfortunately, takes that moment to be like, I've got to take care of myself. And then I think once you have that realization and that recognition, and you start taking care of yourself and you start pouring into your own cup, like for me anyways, I speak from like me personally, when I finally was able to flip that switch of like, okay, I've got to take care of myself, my relationships, like with athletes, with friends, with whomever, like flourished after that. Because I'm like, I thought that I had good relationships to start with, and I thought that I was like a relator and a relationship coach, and that like I could really get to know people. But like once I flipped that around to kind of fill my cup first and then was pouring into other people, oh my God, I felt like things just exponentially got better after that.
Yeah, it is. It's the relationship and how we treat ourselves is, again, it sounds cheesy. It maybe sound woo-woo or soft to some people, but if you don't have a good relationship with yourself, why should I trust you that you're going to have a good relationship with me as a coach? Like, you need to be in a good place, and people will see that, they will feel that, and they will then be like, man, this person, look how they live, look how they show up. If you look at the people that we, coaches, role models, whoever we admire, it's usually not because they do specific tasks, it's who they are as people, how they show up, how they show up for others. And it's usually because they've got a pretty darn good relationship with themselves. And if we don't have that good relationship with ourselves, and it's only superficial, and we're not willing to do the deeper work to improve upon who we are, then we start to look at the relationships. And if the relationships and the coaching relationships that we have are as superficial as some of the ones that we have with ourselves and all these emotions that we try to repress, then the coaching relationships are going to be the same thing. And the ability to coach and to lead is only going to be as deep as the relationship that you have. And if it's a superficial relationship you have with your own emotions, then don't be surprised then when it shows up the same way in other people. And those, to me, are the coaches, they're the ones that don't, Doc Rivers had talked about it in a coaching documentary on Netflix. He's like, don't get too close to these people. They're going to hurt you. Like, what the hell is that? It's taking his words on that, but it's like, no, like, you have to have a good relationship with yourself to pour into yourself. That way you can pour into others, because to your point, people are going to feel that. And they're like, oh my God, who is this Whitney? Who is Whitney 2.0 that is like showing up? And then they're going to be like, they see you winning, they see you succeeding, they see like how you're helping other people, and it becomes contagious. Otherwise, like just because we're there and we have a tendency to get so task oriented, we just start punching the clock. But yeah, we have to start with ourselves and take care of ourselves. And all that does is then, even if you're working with people on a shorter basis, the impact you will have will be significantly higher.
Yeah, I think I'll kind of take this on a small tangent here, but like you mentioned the Doc Rivers quote of like, don't get too close, they're going to hurt you. I think someone said the other week, we fail to recognize our humanness and that we are human. And I think we miss a huge part of a life experience when we don't allow ourselves to get hurt, right? I think we put these huge walls up, avoiding getting hurt, avoiding loss, avoiding failure, avoiding whatever it is. But yeah, we miss a huge part of life when we don't. And we learn so much from those low moments in our lives, from those moments when we do fail, when we are hurt, when somebody did let us down. Like, we learn so much from that. And I oftentimes see people, and I see it often in like the soft community, just guys who don't want to be let down. They don't want to fail. And that's just unfortunately the mindset that's bred there. But I see and feel that they struggle the most with relationships, and they struggle in their home life a lot. They struggle in their unit entirely. Like they're just not generally good leaders. But I don't know, in my experience, I always tell people, like, I feel like I've experienced the lowest of the lows, and maybe there's something that's lower than that I experience in life. And I've experienced the highest of the highs. And the more I experience either end of that spectrum, the better person I feel that I am, because I can show up in so many more ways because I've experienced all of these different things and I've allowed those to happen, versus when we don't let those things happen. Yeah, I think we're missing out on a huge part of life and just being human.
Yeah, I agree. Like yes, when we're in that dark place or that low, like it sucks. And trust me, I have been there myself in some really bad spots. And I can also think about potentially like the worst part of that was going through periods of time in which I was very numb, in which like you almost like just being open and truthful. Like there were times a number of years ago to where I would almost want to cry because then I can feel something, then I can go somewhere with something. Otherwise,
Yeah.
I'm just like non-responsive. I am asleep at the wheel. I'm going through it. Like, okay, I'm talking to the people. I'm going through the things. I see I'm working on myself. And then, but you're just phoning it in. So yeah, it's, again, to bounce quotes and all that stuff. I mean, McConaughey and Green Lights, which is an amazing book. I would highly
Yes.
recommend listening to it because he reads it.
Yes, it's so
And so you
good.
can, yeah. And so, but I mean, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he talks about the fact, like with Green Lights, is like if we never get the reds, if we never get the hiccups, we never other things happen, then we can't enjoy the greens. And so I know I've looked at so many like pivotal moments in my life, and it's you can have these both and situations, and how we respond to things it's our own interpretation. It's I have been to, like, I'm divorced. Like there's a part of me that has a chip on my shoulder that sucks, and like that it doesn't line up with who I am as a person. But if I would not have gone through that, the beauty of so many other things that has come out of that would have never come to it. And so if we can approach it from a much more of a neutral stance and represent,
Yeah.
just understand that sometimes these bads have led to good and there's beauty in all these things. And I know, people might roll their eyes at that, but like, I think we really need to
Yeah.
embrace it. And doesn't mean that we want to stay in those lows, but understand that they can sometimes create growth and spring forward and whatever that may be.
Yeah. I find that men, especially, and then even more so with the populations that we work with, kind of like you mentioned yourself, like to carry that chip on their shoulder, whether it was like something that they failed at or something that they could have done better, or any number of things. They like to carry that chip on their shoulder, and it allows them to go hard, and it allows them to push themselves. And once again, like we said, you don't always have to go hard all the time, right? Like and also you're not proving to anything to anyone except yourself there, right?
Yeah.
Especially if no one even knows that chip that you have on your shoulder. Like you're not proving anything to anyone but yourself in that scenario. And yeah, I think more so with men, I see that happening than anything else. What do you like? I find hard sometimes as a female having that conversation with men, because they're like, oh, it's different. Like you're supposed to show emotions, or you're supposed to be happier or whatever. But like, how do you kind of have that conversation? Maybe you've had it with some of your friends or some of the guys that you've worked with. Like, how do you have that conversation with men of like, it's okay to show emotion. It's okay to really feel what you're feeling, and to be vulnerable. Because I saw something on Instagram the other day, and it was, I don't even know why I follow this guy, but something along the lines of like, men can't be vulnerable and like show weakness, and like we have to stand up for like the women in our lives. But quite the opposite. I'd rather see a man who can show emotion, and who, because to me that's strong. I think there's so much strength, and being able to show those things.
Yeah, it will be ever, I think, a journey for so many people, on the
Yeah.
masculine side, and it goes back to like we feel like, it's easier, I think, for our brain to digest and understand that things can be black and white.
Mm-hmm.
But understanding that, yes, having emotion, being like you, I would make the argument, and taking it again, another reference is from Brene Brown. And if people haven't done enough work
Mm-hmm.
in regards to her and shame and guilt, especially within the masculine role, is huge. But like her argument, and she does a really good talk on, you can't have courage without vulnerability. And you look at men
Mm-hmm.
that put themselves in these situations. Okay, what does it mean to be courageous? I'm going out, I'm putting myself out there, I'm going to put myself in harm's way, I'm going to do these things. Does that make you vulnerable? It absolutely does. You know how to be vulnerable. The
Mm-hmm.
chance that, problem is the fact that you don't want to do it emotionally. If you are
Mm-hmm.
a firefighter and you're going into a burning building to some extent, you're being vulnerable with your life from a physical
Mm-hmm.
standpoint, but somehow that gets viewed as different vulnerability than emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
And so really understand that you can't have, it doesn't take courage to shut down. It doesn't take courage to ignore a problem and walk away. That, like, not to put it like, that doesn't make you tough or strong. That means you're disconnected. That means you're repressing. That means all sorts of other stuff comes up, like, and now we're not living, and now we're neutral, and now again we're just back to that autopilot thing. And trust me, like, I'm as guilty as the next. Like, my instinct, and I share it, and I've done a ton of work on myself, and I have so far to go in regards to anything when it comes to like that side. But like, my instinct is I want to shut down. Like, in my head, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
well, it might be better for me just to shut up before I make this matter worse. And then in my
Mm-hmm.
smart brain, I can go back to all these data points for see what happened when you talk, see what happened when you're vulnerable, see what happened when you share, all bad stuff. Shut up, don't talk, shut down. Oh, not my problem. Opposed to like, dude, you know what? It did suck.
Yeah.
But you know what? On the other side of it, if I don't talk, if I don't share my emotions for these people that I love, if I don't stand up for what I believe in, what can come of that? So it is tough. But to your point, you don't have to go from 0 to 100. What is it
Mm-hmm.
just like to go from 0 to 1? So if you're having
Mm-hmm.
conversations with men, if they're in a relationship, whatever that may be, what does it mean just to, even to the point that I was talking about earlier, sharing like the emotions of your day? You got that task done. Okay, cool. How did it feel to get that task done? I don't know. It felt good because there's one less thing to done. Okay, so there was some relief there. Yeah, there was less pressure. Yeah, and so, and a lot of us, we don't learn, we don't know, we haven't gone into those places to really be able to express our emotions. In that
Mm-hmm.
emotional standpoint, going back to Brene Brown, like the three emotions that people referenced that they had across the U.S. was happy, sad, and angry. And there's 88 emotions, which basically just means we limit our
Yeah.
ability to have the vernacular to understand all these other emotions. So it's
Mm-hmm.
basically, it's something I talk with coaches, is the fact that if you don't have the language to communicate as a coach, so many of us, specifically as men, do not have the emotional language to
Mm-hmm.
understand and recognize our feelings, because it's hard, and it's easier to make up an excuse and buy into our own stories as far as, that's why hard I don't want to do. Let me go run hot, and I'm going to do all these other tasks to prove myself as a man. Well, I got to keep the lights on. I got to do this. That's my job. Like, okay, cool, man. How do you feel about doing that? There's, like, a word I use is pressure. I kind of like the pressure. There's good and there's bad that comes with it. But do we have the emotional language to really understand? And it's small wins. How do we just find something to share about our day, share who we are? What is a way of being, so to speak, in which we can show
Yeah.
up for people, opposed to what can we do?
Yeah, I think that's great. A lot of kind of great things that you said there. One, I would also recommend reading Brene Brown's stuff, because she just does a lot of what her research is in, and it's really kind of eye opening when you start to see. And like you said, people use those three words, and I find that funny. I like very much can relate to that. Like, and when I started therapy years ago, my therapist gave me a feelings wheel and an emotions wheel. And
Yeah.
it started out with like your five basic emotions, and then like would branch out to like bigger and bigger words. And by the time you're at the end of it, you're like, okay, well, I'm not necessarily angry, but like, where can I go from here to explain like how I'm feeling this? And like, that has helped me so much, just, and even feeling right. Cause I think the problem comes, like you said, we don't have the vernacular or the verbiage
Yep.
to talk about them. So why would we talk about, like, I remember when I first started in therapy, and of course she's asking like, how does that make you feel? And I'm like, I don't know. I feel
Yeah.
something. I don't know what I feel, but I feel something. So then the instinct is to just be like, well, I'm fine. Like, I can't describe what I'm feeling. I can't talk about what I'm feeling. So obviously I'm fine. It's not debilitating at this point, right? It could get
Yep.
debilitating if I let it, but it's not at this point. So I think like just having the words to use for that. But I also really like how you said, and I don't actually know that I've ever thought about it this way, but it is very vulnerable to walk into a burning building. It is very vulnerable to walk in front of people who were shooting at you. It is very
Yeah.
vulnerable to be in an open firefight. Like that is a very vulnerable thing to do. I don't think that the folks who are doing those things and putting themselves in those situations recognize the vulnerability it takes to do that. So then, yeah, how can we transition that to when we're at home or even just around friends or at work or whatever, and like into that emotional vulnerability? Because I have to think, and like I said, I've never been in that. I've never done those jobs. I've never been in those positions myself. But I have to think, like, gosh, it's got to feel amazing to them when they're doing those things and they're putting themselves in those positions. And so if they only so much as like recognize that and did that at home, like then you get to feel those feelings at home too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is. It's, it's not that we probably get the same amount of dopamine, so to speak,
Right.
opposed to doing those things, but nonetheless, it's like what happens on the other side of that hard conversation. As far as like it's the same thing. One's physical, one's emotional. You are like, if we're taking fire and I stand up, am I not exposing myself physically? If I'm at
Yeah.
home communicating with my significant other and I share how I'm feeling, when you do this, I feel this, or I'm not
Mm-hmm.
feeling X, or whatever it is, you're literally exposing yourself, hoping that
Yeah.
there is some sort of trust that you guys have built. And so, I mean, there's so many layers. And so, trying to understand how do you create the environment then as a person?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you are vulnerable as a person, so if you and I are having a conversation, we're going to be able to pick up if this other person is being open, being honest, being vulnerable with me. And if by doing that, that's going to then allow us, it models to us like, oh my gosh, Whitney's being honest. She's being open with me. Because she's being open with me, I can be open to her. And
Mm-hmm.
she's modeling this for me, and it creates this
Yeah.
environment. So if you're working in these communities, if you're not being open, and it goes back to the relationship with yourself, if you're not being open and honest about the people that you work with, they're going to see that. They're going to feel that people are smart. They're like, I don't know who the real Hunter is. So why would I let him
Mm-hmm.
see the real version of me compared to, look, he's laying everything out on the table. It's safe for me to do the same. It's safe for me to maybe say, hey man, I don't like going home because of this, or whatever it may be, because I know that
Yeah.
it's safe to do so because of the vulnerability that the other person has created for us.
Yeah.
And so really it goes back to like self accountability to do that for others.
Mm-hmm.
And as coaches, it's something that we need to do. I mean, I'm all for, again, coaching expressions. Like it was told, and sometimes you don't want your athletes to know in life whether you're the hammer or the nail as a coach. In other words, you want to
Mm-hmm.
show up consistently for your athletes all the time. Yes. And I think it's okay to act like you're actually a human, to act like something's going on, to model that for them, because they're going to see like, wow, he's tired, he's exhausted, he's this, guys, I'm shot, didn't sleep much last night, this is what's going on, but here's the deal, we're getting after today. Awesome. Even coach, when he's not in his good spot, is here ready to go. That allows me to do the
Mm-hmm.
same. And so yeah,
Yeah.
as coaches, as people, we have to model vulnerability. It doesn't matter if we're a coach or not, and I would argue we are all coaches. Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
but point being is if we're not willing to model that vulnerability, be open and honest with others, don't be
Yeah.
surprised then and don't get upset when somebody's not willing to open back up to us, because we set the tone ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's big. And I would also add to that to if you do open up to someone and they don't reciprocate that, like don't let that allow you to close off to the next person, right? Because I think and I've even had this said to me is like, oh my, like I've not shown you like much of me, but you're still so willing to be like open and vulnerable and honest. I'm like, well, because if I continue to show up in that way, no matter who I'm around, I'm eventually going to find my people. Right. And I feel like that's how I have found my people is because
Yeah.
now I'm confident enough and comfortable enough and showing up in that way that if I show up in that way and maybe I'm around someone who isn't open to isn't open to that, who isn't going to reciprocate that, then I just know right off the bat, like, okay, I don't want you in my life. Like, you're not worth keeping in my life. And like, on to the next person, like the next friend, partner, whomever, who can reciprocate that. Because now I'm to the point, and probably same for you, like, I only want people in my life who are in that same spot. And if you're unable to show up in that way, because we've put in the work to be able to show up that way. So when you meet someone who's unable to, it's almost like, I want to help. Like, I'm not going to be like, F you. Like, I don't want to help you, but it's like, let's have the conversation of like, are you interested in learning how to show up in this way? Are you interested in like, what can I do to be more emotionally available? But if that's not the case, it's like, I don't know. I think you're missing out on a huge part of life. Like I said.
Yeah, and I think that's where, I mean, I think there's a couple thoughts that come to mind. One, I love where all this is going, because it's this, to me, this is the fun topics that people don't get enough into in coaching.
Yeah.
But yeah, from the vulnerabilities, maybe they need it modeled more. Maybe one data point, one touch point of you being open and honest is not enough for them. Maybe it's going back to that, the Green Beret at first group didn't like me because of somebody before. And if I don't continue to be consistent in how I show up time and time again, then he's not going to get enough data, enough trust on his point to see like, okay, it wasn't just him trying to do this one day. It wasn't a one-off. This is who he is. This is now the space that I can create. And then as well as like understanding, why are we being open? Why are we being vulnerable? If we're doing that, I think for others' fit, not ours, I think it can actually become a form of manipulation. In other words, if I'm going to be open, I'm going to be honest because you need to be open and honest, then I'm trying to get you to like, no, I'm going to be open and honest because I know it's going to be the best thing for me. And I know it's going to have an effect on you. If it does, awesome. You know what I can't control? How you take it. I'm going to adjust my behavior. I'll do what I can. But how you perceive, that is all your stuff. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to continue trying to show up and work to be the best version of myself. Because I think then what we see is in some of the worlds, like people are like, man, I'm going to be vulnerable, and that will teach them to be vulnerable. And once they're vulnerable, I'll really get to see who they are. And then once we do, we can take that information and like, you're manipulating people. And I know that might be a bit a stretch, but point being, like, if you're going to be vulnerable and open, model it for yourself, model it for the right reasons, because you know it will just allow others to be the best versions of themselves.
Yeah, for sure. I'd agree. And I think to your point, like, I think it's obvious when someone is doing it in a manipulative way, and then when someone's doing it in a genuine way, and that's just how they want to show up. Like, that's, at least to me anyways, when you are someone who is genuine in it, when someone else is coming off as manipulative, it's like, yeah, I don't really like that either. Yeah, I'd agree. I think that we could, go ahead.
No, go. You're good.
I think that we could go on with this topic forever, and I love where the conversation is going. I'm going to end here because we're at right about an hour, but I do end all of my episodes asking my guest, what does wild strength mean to you? You can take that quite literally. You can take it however you want, or just what comes to mind when you think of wild strength.
A strength in life. I think we've really looked at the longevity piece, but it's, to me, having that wild strength, like, two things come to mind. Unconventional in regards to, can you have the strength to go through, like, whatever that may be, strength, endurance, physical, mental, or emotional. And I always associate wild with play, with fun, when I think of this play, as far as people stepping outside of the gym, stepping outside of comfort zones, and really getting into, like, what brings you joy, to move your body, to lean into things that are uncomfortable. To me, so, like, that's why I love the name. In regards, I love the use of the word wild, and so for me, like, wild strength is unconventional fun, testing the limits mentally and physically.
Yeah, I love that. Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you, if they're interested in you being their coach? Where can people find you?
Yeah, easiest spot is one on LinkedIn. Is hit me up on that. It's literally just Hunter Schurrer, SCHURRER, or on Instagram as well, Coach_Hunter Schurrer, all one word as far as Hunter Schurrer. But yeah, hit me up wherever. I'll be at NSCA's tactical conference. Instagram, Coach_Hunter Schurrer, LinkedIn, Hunter Schurrer. Would love to connect. I'm a big fan of, like, actually being social on social media. So reach out, connect. Would love to hear from you. Would love thoughts and anything and everything.